Okay, so today I'm going to talk about making your own weathering pigments from pastels. So this is a very easy process. It's quite cheap. So this set I just got off Amazon for about £12. You can find them cheaper, you can find them more expensive, you can find different sets. This is a massive 64 colour set. These are just small ones. You can get them full size. The full size pastels give you about the equivalent of a normal weathering pigments. This is an ultimate modelling products set, Sandy Earth. So you get about the same from a full pigment, so from a full pastel. And this is obviously just repurposed GW pots, which are quite useful for that. But I'm just going to be using the small set because it's quicker to show you guys, for one thing. And actually, generally you don't need a lot of weathering pigments for our purposes in the hobby, in mini hobby specifically. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with products like this. So they are just a powder, pigmented powder, which you can apply to the model, usually with a brush, and they just stain the surface. They don't stick necessarily by themselves. Generally you need another product to make sure that stays on the model. Some of the staining will remain anyway, but generally if you've got something like a pigment fixer, this is just some Green Stuff World pigment fixer, this will actually make it permanent. You can also mix this with some of these to sort of paint it on, which is a different effect. So these generally are good for things like weathering effects, rust or dust, sort of drip effects where water's run down, discolored things, those kind of things, mixed with a liquid, a fixer or something else. They can represent things like oil streaks. So it really depends on what you're using them for, what your desired end purpose is. They're really useful. I use them a lot, especially in military modelling, but they can be used for a whole range of other things. So the process for this is very easy. So I say I spent about £12 on this set. These little pots, these are just little 5mm pots designed for makeup, like eyeshadow and things like that. I just got a set. I've got 50 of these from Amazon, again about £7 or £8. So the entirety of this costs £20, which is the cost of about 8, and you're getting 8 times more in terms of colours, variations, shades, doing it this way. Now I have seen on various blogs and other things that this isn't as good as buying the real deal. Well, you pay your money and you take your choice, right? So are they as good? Personally, I've always used pastels and never had any issues with them whatsoever. I've never had problems with them flaking off or not staining, or they might be not as heavily pigmented as some of this. I don't know if that's true, to be honest. But you just use a little bit more. We just use subsequent applications. It's not really a big deal. So do I think there is a place for these? Do I think there is a place for pastels? Yes. Would I use exclusively pastels? I have done. I've only ever bought a couple of these ever. This actually came in a Lucky Dip, an Ultimate Products Lucky Dip bag. So I did buy it, but it was kind of not an intent. And I've got another one which also I think I got discounted or with some other things. So I haven't purposely bought a set of modelling pigments just to do that. So I don't have a huge extensive experience of those, but I've never needed that. Again, you are the judges. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you this is a tool in our armoury that we can use. So what do you need to actually create these? Well, what I would have traditionally done in the past, and I'll take this one here because probably won't be using this one, is just get a scalpel or a blade. I'm just using an old blade here. This again was in my dad's modelling things. I've never bought one of these specifically. Really, I don't use them. And you can just scrape off what you need. So you can see it doesn't take much to get them off. You get a little pile of dust, and then you can use that. Obviously, if you're just creating a set of these, you don't want to be doing this. If you're just using them in a set and then using them as and when you come to things, then that's fine. But if you're creating a batch like I'm about to do, you don't want to be doing scrapey. The easiest way to do this, I'll just move that out of the way a minute to just get rid of this. So take a sheet of paper, give it a hard crease in the centre. The reason for that should be obvious, but I'll come to it in a minute. And your friend here is a mortar and pestle. So you can guess where this is going. It's quite a brutal process. I'm going to start off by using a white, because I'm going to start light, go to dark for obvious reasons. You pop it in your mortar and pestle, and basically you're just going to crush that. It only takes a few seconds. You want to give it a bit of a grind because you want a nice, even, fine powder, like so. I typically just use then what I call a junk brush, or a dry brushing brush, just to remove as much as I can of this powder, because obviously this will kind of go into the stone and the pigment, so I just want to get as much of that off as possible. It doesn't really matter what you're using here, just as long as it's something fairly stiff bristled, so it actually gets this off. And then of course you're going to put all of this and dump it into your paper. Again, just use the brush to go around, just because you want as much of that out of here as possible. You can see got most of that out. Now I have this in the paper, and just move that across, open up my little paper container, and it's just a matter of carefully teasing that into the container, trying not to spill it. Just fill that little container up. So these little makeup containers, 5mm, and there we have it. One modelling pigment from a chalk pastel. Importantly, chalk pastel. Some people say use oil pastels. Oil pastels, for me, have never worked. Some people may get effects out of them, but an oil pastel is waxy, so it'll actually put wax onto your model, so it stains it in a different way. These are dry, so the important thing is they're dry, and then you can manipulate them. And this, I'll give you a little idea what that looks like going back. Okay, so here you can see I have this unfinished tank destroyer that I showed on a what's next video, and applying these is really simple. If I can get rid of pieces that are loose inside. There we go. So you just want to use an old brush, don't use something new, because this will ruin it. And wherever you want, so I'm just going to create some basic weathering, streaks down here that have been caused by rain, just discolouring this. So you just get a bit of your pigment, just pop it on, you just literally just drawing it down. I usually do this with paper because it is quite messy. And the reason I like these as well is it's a really subtle effect. So I blow that off, you can see now we just have that very subtle weathering streak down there. So you can push it right down and get into the powder so it sticks more on the brush. And you can do this at a couple of points if you want, and then just kind of grinding it in. remove it just by, so you can see I've got these weathered effects now just on here. Hopefully you can see that on the camera. It's subtle, but subtlety is what you want with weathering, and this is why I like these. I don't know whether, you know, more heavily pigmented, again I don't know whether they are more heavily pigmented, but more heavily pigmented products from other, you know, from actual manufacturers do more than this, but you can see it's quite a subtle effect, and you can always go back and use another brush to remove. You just dull this down a little bit if you need to. So you can see the effect builds up very quickly. Very effective. So let me just try another colour just to show you. So let's try a more sort of orangey rust kind of colour. So let's try a couple of different colours. Let's try an orangey rust, so a really bright orange here. Normally I would clean this out, but I'm not going to bother doing that for the purposes of this. Again, we're just going to crush that, get rid of it, bit of a scrape around. Again, just use our dry brushing brush to take as much of this off as possible. That's most of it present there. Again, take a little pot. Just tease that mixture in. So we have our orange there. Got the white and the orange. I'm going to come back and I'm going to do a couple more colours. I'm going to do this quite rusty looking brown, and then I'm going to do this really dark brown. In reality I probably would do this as well, but again, just for the purposes of this, we'll do a couple. Do that. I often do this in 2 pieces of paper. So then you can catch any that go below. So there you see, now we've got a nice set of rust colours. So let's see what we can do with that. So let's focus on somewhere which might receive a little bit of rust. Let's have a look at around these kind of areas. I'm going to start off with the dark, and again just going to go and put a whole bunch of this in here and kind of smoosh it around where we want it, because what we're doing is staining that surface, right? Not. You see, you don't need much before you actually do get, you know, quite a good amount of colour on there, because again, you're not going for high coverage here. This is tinting, it's staining. Small amounts are what's important. Small amounts of colour. So I'm going to be using less colour here than I was before. Just going into some of those, not everywhere. Just coming up again, just trying not to contaminate up through the lighter colours. Oh, I got way too much there. So again, subtlety is what you want. Building up these effects. You can always go back and add more if you want. It's difficult to subtract it once it's on there, you know, other than repainting and going back to it. So those are the kinds of things you can do with the dry pastel. If you want to do something like streaks of rust, so we've got some rivets up here, you probably can't see them very well. Okay, so if we're going to use these to create streaks and things, we just need to use a little bit of solvent. I'm just using water here, so we've got a little bit of water here. So you just add, you don't need to add very much, a couple of drops, just to create kind of a liquid paste. The consistency of this really depends again on what you're doing. So I'm actually going to use a reasonable brush this time. Because we've got actual liquid, that's not going to be so much of an issue. So again, I'm going to come and I'm just going to take, first of all, my dark and just go around this rivet and then just streak down. So you can see that's really easy to do. So use the brown, and these dry almost immediately, so probably do a bit more of a streak here. Finally, I can just use the orange. I just want to pick out some areas around the top here which are actually rusty, like so. And again, and I can go back to here where I had my subtle pieces before. Some more pieces on. Some black with those just to tone some of that down, to mix in. Blackish brown, I should say. So hopefully you can see on that, really easy to create that, and you can see that'll, now that the liquid, the water has faded off, that's a really subtle streak, so much more so than, you know, diluting paints down and doing that. So absolutely you can use paints, you can use these pastels, but this is a very, very cost-effective solution. Just going to go ahead and a bit more. You can see you combine the effects as well quite easily. It depends on obviously how weathered you want something to be. You know, has this been something standing out in a field after being shot, for instance? Like we're seeing a lot of vehicles in Ukraine, they rust extremely quickly. Yeah, battle damaged vehicle. Or is it something that's, you know, just got a few points from rust is spread up here. So hopefully you can see there all these nice streaks effects. I've got some variation in tone from the white that I used previously to give that nice weathered effect. As that dries, you can see already it's drying, fading more into the background, so it doesn't look too, too much. And again, if you feel that, well, actually I want a bit more spread from where I had it before, you go back. So I want my lighter shade. Give a more of a wider area. You have to be careful, of course, because like here, where you've still got some of the wet, it's going to bring out the pigment more, pull it down onto the model more. You can see you can create really subtle staining effects. Maybe when it's been driving, when it's been wet, it's sort of pushed it back a bit, so you've got a bit of a wind streak effect. But the main piece, when it stopped, it's gone down. So that's the basic premise of the whole of this. So it's really easy to use, and then of course if you wanted to come in, make those permanent, once you've decided that you've got the effect you want, you just use some pigment fixer over this just to set it. There are various things you can use. This one's from Green Stuff World, but there are other pigment fixers out there. And then you've got your weathered model. You can of course use that in combination with commercial pigments. This is by no means saying never use commercial pigments. For instance, this has been going through sandy earth, so actually this is quite nice, probably combined with the rust. If we want to get some of this over, but you can see how they behave very similarly. The commercial product and the chalks. Yep. So for me, I've never had an issue where the pigments don't stick, their pigments aren't dense enough in chalk pastels. I find them really cost-effective solution to doing some really nice weathering effects very cheaply. So there it is, 1/8 of the price for me here. You might find them cheaper, get them down to 1/10 of the price, or more or less. But that is what I wanted to show you today. Not only how do you create these weathering powders, it really is, it's just crushed chalk pastel, very simple. And then how you can use them, just to show that I'm not talking out of my arse, and that how you use them, they can't be used. And, a couple of different ways of using them there, just native, as powders, or combined with a bit of water, just as streaking. And you can combine them, you can make mixes of them if you wish. You don't have to use a pure powder, you can mix portions of them. So really the world is your oyster. Experiment, have a bit of a test and a blast with it. You're not losing a lot of money. So obviously the pots aren't necessary if you're just using them as and when. I just find they're nice and convenient, you just grab them off. And you've got lots of shades to play with. So if I bring this back, so if we wanted to do rust, again, this is quite a nice rust colour as well. You can combine lots of different ones, in applications, one after the other, to create a nice complex effect. You don't have to do the very basic stuff that I was doing here. I've just done a quick 30-second, 1 minute on this. This is more extreme than I would do on this. I'll end up taking a lot of this off, I imagine, blending it down with something else, because you can. So the other thing I just wanted to show before I left this video is, I said experiment, and I would take a lot of this off. So until you fix them, these are not permanent. So See, I've just put a bit of water on my brush. I'm going to take some of that off actually, just so it's damp. And I can actually either change this, broaden it out to make this a longer streak here, or if I really go for it, I can basically just erase it. So I find these, especially if you're starting off with weathering in modelling, particularly in AFVs where there's a lot of interpretations, there's no right or wrong really, it's a great way of just experimenting and learning what you feel is right, and also doing this post putting them on. It's a nice way of just pulling back the effect. As I say, maybe these are more wind streaks. You can see now I've really taken that back, because this isn't a model isn't a tank that's been just set out in a field doing nothing. Yeah, it's been used. Yeah, it's got a bit of rust on these bolts, rivets, and that has stained some where they've rusted a little bit. But that's gone down and just stained the armour, the paint on the armour. It's not kind of endemically rusted through. This is staining from a bolt, not the armour plate rusting itself. So again, easy to take that down. Again, if I didn't want that, basically you can just erase it. So personally for me, when I found this was a friend of mine, a guy called Phil Stachinkas. Some of you may have heard the name. Works for Forge World, at least he used to, before it got kind of absorbed into Games Workshop proper. He's written several books on weathering and armour, and he kind of introduced this to me first well over 20 years ago, maybe even more than that, about 25 years ago. And it's something I've always used on my armour, and I just found it works in all scales. This is a really nice, cheap way to get those weathering effects. You've also got some loony colours here, these fluorescent things. So if you're doing Gundam stuff, or if you're doing just wacky bits from D&D or whatever, you have that capability here. Or if you're doing figures or whatever, because this works whatever you're using. Provided you've got a reasonable base, pastels will work. That's all for this instalment of Man's Model Moments. Please like, subscribe and share, and I look forward